You're listening to the Talent Therapy Podcast. Here, you'll find discussions around recruiting trends and best practices with talent acquisition leaders in the biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries so that you and your team are informed and up to date in an ever-evolving space. And now, here's your host, Chris Tamburini.
All right, Miss Kate Rushton, welcome to the Talent Therapy Podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
How about you give a quick introduction to yourself for the audience?
Okay, I am Kate Rushton. I am the head of people at GentiBio. I've been in the HR field, specifically talent acquisitions, where I started out for almost 15 years. And I live in Boston with my family.
Okay, all right. So 15 years is a long time to be in talent acquisition. I know a little bit of your background, but maybe you can give me a refresher. How did you get into talent acquisition in the first place? Because I feel like nobody tries to get into it. It just typically happens. So I'm kind of curious what your story is.
It's funny. I try to reflect on how I ended up in TA. I don't really know. I have a business degree. I have a Spanish degree, which is not very helpful at all. And I had always thought I'd go into sales. And when I graduated, it's like the height of the recession, I ended up finding this contract, like a recruiting coordinator role for a medical device company in Mass. And I just kind of fell in love with it. In recruiting similar to sales, and I was good at it. And that's really where I started. It was just Straumann. It was a dental prosthetics company up in Andover. But no one ever really wants to stay a coordinator for that long. And so I started to shift more into sourcing, full cycle recruiting, and then like employment branding.
I didn't know that you started in dental recruiting, Straumann. I had no idea. You know what? There's somebody else I spoke to. I got to say, and I think she actually brought your name up, and I don't think she'll mind that. Corey Ram. Yeah.
Corey Kenya.
Yeah.
She hired me.
She was your boss, right? Yeah.
I love Corey. Yeah.
She mentioned your name. She's like, oh, you should actually have Kate do this with you, because her and I also did a recording. And I'm like, actually, we already have it scheduled. So
yeah, Corey's great. She was my first boss, and now we laugh because I think Corey's like a year older than me. I was probably the first person that she managed, but she was wonderful. So I was there for a couple months and then transitioned over to Boston Scientific. And then I moved into the city, and my commute just wasn't that great. And so I shifted over to Liberty Mutual. I was there for a while. That was probably one of the best chapters in my career. But at the end of the day, insurance isn't that sexy.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get back into life sciences. So I shifted back in and went to Biogen, Rubius, and now GentiBio.
Why? And I know you've really shifted your career towards like the people operation things, but why have you stayed in talent acquisition and recruiting? Because a lot of people will enter the field, and this is probably more so on the agency side, but in general, they enter the field of recruiting. They face a ton of adversity because candidates don't accept their offer, or, you have to do a lot of work to get to one placement. There's a lot of dynamics that go into the world of talent acquisition and recruiting. Why do you stay? Why have you stayed in it? And clearly you're continuing down the path of focusing on and working with people. So what's that motivation for you?
I think the beauty of talent acquisition is you get to change people's lives. I mean, you're meeting new people, you're networking, which is what I love to do, and to be able to give an opportunity to come to a company where you're, one of your major responsibilities is building this culture and helping people grow and develop. Like, I just find the work that I do incredibly rewarding. But I will say, like, over the past probably 6 or 7 years, I've shifted. Like, I've always had talent acquisition under my umbrella and a team and whatnot. But I've shifted more into the business partnering, and I love it. I never thought I would like it, but I've actually found I'm probably a little bit more passionate about it than I am with TA.
No, I think you alluded to that at one of our previous conversations in the past. And I feel that people like you will take one of two routes, right? They'll continue to just focus on TA, and they want to do TA, and they want to have nothing to do with more of the HR or HR business partner aspect of things. And then there's other individuals like you who start off in TA, spend a ton of time in TA and recruiting, And then they're like,
Mhm.
I really want to focus more so on cultivating a company and working with TA, but really working on the HR business partner side of things. How has that transition been for you, and why do you think that that's happened?
Yeah. I remember being at Liberty Mutual and thinking to myself, like working really closely with the HR advisors is what they were titled there. Thinking like, I just don't think that role is for me. But then when I shifted back into life sciences and went to Biogen and Rubius and saw like what that true business partner role was, it excited me because I still had talent acquisition, right, in all those roles, so I could have a team. We were bringing talent in, right, growing this amazing culture. But then from a business partner perspective, like getting to know the business, working through like employee relations issues, performance management, learning and development, like I genuinely like the work that I'm doing, and it's different. Like there's no day that's ever the same. I just really like it.
Do you?
It's hard,
Yeah.
and maybe that's what it is. Like it's been my most recent challenge, right? Like when you've mastered, or you feel like you've mastered something. Like I was starting to feel with talent acquisition, like this was a new challenge for me. And then COVID happened, right? None of us knew what we were doing.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, like, what? Obviously, it brings different stresses, right? So the stress of recruiting, and then there's the stress of, or the challenge, as you put it, of being an HR business partner or an HR leader. I guess what I'm trying to say is, do you find one more stressful than the other, or do you find that the the stress of the HR business partner side is more of a rewarding challenge? That's kind of what it sounds like, but
I know exactly what you mean. I mean, they all have their own challenges and stressors, right? Talent acquisition, I think it depends on where you are as a company, right? Like, what are you guys looking to do from a overall talent acquisition strategy? You know this. We've talked about it. Like when you're in the middle of a build, there's a ton of work that goes into that, right?
yeah,
But from a business partnering perspective, I think there's a different level of stress because humans are unpredictable, right? So there's no employee situation that's ever really the same. Of course, you encounter similar situations,
yeah,
but like you never know how an employee is going to react when you're managing through a situation. And so like being able to read a room, think through like what those different scenarios will be, is really what I'm enjoying doing.
yeah. We're gonna talk more about that in a minute because I'm kind of curious your thoughts and your strategy when it comes to kind of building an organization from a cultural perspective. But I want to go back to recruiting for a minute. So obviously, part of building an organization and building a culture starts with recruiting. And you've spent, as you mentioned earlier, 15 or so years in recruiting, and you've built out recruiting functions. And so I guess the first thing I want to get to is, from your perspective, how do you like to intertwine recruiting versus recruiting ops, right? Because, or talent acquisition and talent acquisition operations, because they are two very, very related functions. But the more and more I talk to individuals like you, and the more and more I find out about different companies, they're really separate functions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to imagine you've been involved in building both. And then I also have to imagine you probably gravitated more towards one than the other. So, talk to me about your thoughts on recruiting versus recruiting ops, and how you see those fitting into any successful build of a company.
Yeah, I think when it comes to recruiting, if you're successful at recruiting, you're a relationship builder, right? So you're not just building relationships with candidates, you're getting to know your hiring manager. And I think where I've seen less successful recruiting functions, right, or full cycle recruiters, is that ability to build relationships. And like, Chris, you know me well enough. I'm probably not your most traditional HR person.
No.
Like, you gotta be normal with people. Like, let your hair down, get to know the person, whether we're talking about the candidate and the hiring manager. I think that's like a core skill and competency that differentiates talent acquisition operations, right? For talent TA operations, I would say you have to be able to be forward thinking and understand the needs of the organization, right? So like when I went to Genti, I knew that we were in the middle of a huge build. Was I going to spend a ton of time, testing out new systems and whatnot. I wasn't, because I didn't have time to do that, right? So I knew like what I had to get in place was get an ATS in place. How are we going to, what does our sourcing strategy look like? How are we branding ourselves in the market? Like that's where I spent my time. Now that recruiting has slowed down for us, the woman on my team and I were spending a lot more time around like just the overall processes and like the skeleton that needs to be put in place to support the organization when we begin recruiting again. Do you know what I'm saying?
I totally know what you're saying.
Yeah. And to answer your question, what do I prefer? Probably operations.
Yeah.
You have solid TA operations in place. Like your team can do friggin' anything.
Yeah. It makes everything so much easier when you're trying to bring people on, right? Because if you're the best recruiter in the world, which I know you told me already that you are, and you're able to build relationships and attract people and really sell the high points of the company and bring someone in. But if that candidate's experience, for lack of a better term, sucks when they're trying to start the job or learn more about the benefits or like have the offer presented to them, then it could totally get lost, right?
Right.
Yeah. So having that robust process in place for the talent, and when I say the talent, I mean the recruiting talent to work within that scaffolding makes a huge difference. It's like, it's like playing like it's like a sport, right? It's like, okay, you could have a bunch of really great athletes on your team, but if there's no coach or there's no plan, like it doesn't really matter. Or it's
right.
It could go well, but it probably won't.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a shit show.
Yeah.
I mean, and just to clarify, like, I think probably why I like the operations side better is because this is where you and I do differ. I don't love full cycle recruiting. Like it's just, and you're really good at it. And I knew that like right away when I was doing it. It could have also been the role because I was recruiting for, insurance sales reps in all of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and was traveling to like 100 different insurance sales offices for about a year. I was like, this blows. I need to get out of this. And that's when I was able to, shift and get way more experience in like employment branding, internal communications, external communications.
Yeah.
That was when I was at Liberty.
Interesting. Yeah, I can't imagine it's got to be fun. First off, that sounds like a tough recruit, just from like a substance standpoint. And then, if you're traveling all over these offices. So wait, when you were traveling to the offices, were you like trying to get to know like the hiring teams to bring people in, or were you just going there to like interview candidates, or both?
No, it was, I like look back and God, I was just like driving all over to those different offices, but the way that it worked. And so where do I even want to start? It's a base plus commission, but there's a draw, right? So I think you start at maybe today it's like 45K is your base, but then after a certain period of time, it would drop to 25, 20 over time. But the whole idea with that was like, if you were a strong sales rep, the commission you could, be pulling in at the time, this is over 10 years ago, 6 figures, right? What I will say about Liberty in my experience there is that, I made the comment earlier, is it the sexiest industry? No. However, everyone needs insurance, right? You need insurance. You need home insurance, car insurance. Everyone should have life insurance. So it's a really, really competitive industry. And so what I'll say is you had to be really innovative and creative in how you were going to engage talent, right? Interest customers to sign up for your insurance. And so I learned a lot about like innovation, the beauty of like considering new technologies to find new talent. It was a really good chapter. The travel that I was doing was, this will make you laugh, I was going to different sales offices. I would set up these open houses where you'd have the candidates come in and we would do like round robins with all the hiring managers in hopes that they would be interested.
Yeah.
And then what was interesting about that space is you could think you found like this amazing candidate and you're like, oh, we got them, right? They're super excited about working at this office. They'd accept the job and then they may not show up on their first day. this happened.
Oh,
See, you had to learn, like you had to have thick skin because we had these goals that we had to hit on a, weekly and monthly basis, which was part of our overall performance review. So that resilience, like I would say I learned a lot about resilience.
oh yeah.
Role.
I mean, totally. It's funny. I feel like a lot of entry level recruiting roles are those volume based recruits where you have to, whether you're an agency or whether you're internal somewhere like a Liberty Mutual, you have to hire, 50 people in a month. And, like the quality of that experience and the quality of just what you can do based on your bandwidth just suffers. Right. And then,
Right.
when you're hiring 50 people or whatever the number is, yeah, everyone seems awesome. And then they just send an email, or sometimes not even an email. They just no show and you don't hear anything. You're like, how does anyone actually do that? But it happens. I was thinking about it earlier today, actually. It's funny that you brought that. I was literally thinking about it earlier today. I was like, can you imagine if that happened now? If there was like no communication and a senior director just didn't show up on the first day of the job? Like, it'd be crazy.
But that's like where, we're talking about like ops and technology. Like, think of how the world has changed in recruiting over the past decade. Like, you weren't doing video calls, right? Like, you were cold calling. Yeah. You're wearing a headset, dialing 100 numbers a day, making notes if they answered or not. Like, it was a really manual process. I reflect on like the way that my current TA team operates versus what we were even doing 5 years ago. Like, it's changed so much.
Yeah, no, it really has. Like, you're right. Like, it was such a manual process. And at the time, like I thought I had all this nice technology, but it's really just a glorified notepad that you're typing stuff into.
Right.
And yeah, a database. But another thing that I think about, which is actually insane, totally insane, is I had to meet every single candidate in person before I could even consider working with them. And so think about that. Like, you make all these calls, you talk to 40, 50 people a week, you meet 10 or 15 people a week. And then from there, it's like, okay, are these guys going to be a fit anywhere? And now you can do video communication. And yeah, the process has changed. Like, you mentioned cold calling, always a debate, especially on the agency side, as to how effective this is. Obviously 10, 15, 20 years ago, 1985 to 2005, it was really the only way to get in touch with people. And then email came, and that was really beneficial. And now there's LinkedIn. And now, does anyone pick up their phone anymore? Like, I don't know. I can't tell you the last time I've picked up a number that I didn't recognize. However, I will say I do use that tactic because I'm doing, deep searches, and I do get people to pick up the phone, but it's a very low probability. And so internally, is that something that, like, if you have a recruiter at some of your previous companies, your current company, are you saying, hey, have you called anybody on this position? Or are you just kind of relying on applicants and we'll call it like LinkedIn or other types of technology to get the inflow?
No, that's a good question. Wait, just one other thing. Think about leaving voicemails.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
And they would call back after they listened to your voicemail.
Yeah.
I think it's so different. No, I'm not saying, did you call the person? However, what I will say is, like, depending on the role and the level of the position, who the recruiter is, like, if they have a really solid network, I know that they're like texting candidates because they're people they've worked with in the past, right? Those are much easier to engage. But no, I haven't really thought about cold calling in a really long time.
I know, it's funny. Like, if you 15, 20 years ago, you told someone you were a recruiter, you're like, oh, you must be cold calling all the time. And now it's not really the case. Also, you just mentioned voicemail. Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. When was the last time you even listened to a voicemail? Because I'm sure you get them from time to time. You're like,
I do.
Do you listen to them?
No.
Yeah. Do you? Yeah.
I
no.
don't.
But if
I have all of my, like, any number that I get that I don't know or have saved in my phone, right? And we have a lot of them. They go straight to voicemail, and I'll just quickly read like the first line.
Yeah.
It'll be like, "Hey, Kate, this is so and so. Saw your position that's open." I delete. I mean, I don't even listen to them anymore.
Yeah, I know. I don't leave voice.
But you also, but you get to a point where, like, I know the good recruiters in my network that I want to work with, right? Like, you're one of them. Where I have a position that's open. I'm not Googling who's a great ClinDev retained firm that I want to work with. Like, I know who I want to work with.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, but it's funny, right? And thank you, by the way, for the kind words. But yeah, I mean, the voicemails are interesting because to me they're like they're so much more dynamic and so much more personal than a text. But I'm not responding to voicemails or listening to them. Same thing. I'll look at the transcription and be like, delete,
Yep.
but I'll respond to a text like 90% of the time. Right. So it's kind of funny how that's evolved. All right. I think we're going off on a huge tangent here, but that's perfect. So, I'm kind of curious. So we've talked about recruiting and recruiting ops and how important that is to the structure of building a company. I guess the next step from there would be like, all right, how do you really strategize your recruiting function, right? So you have the operations set up, but maybe we can take a step deeper into what those operations look like. Like, so you have your ATSs, you have a contract recruiter, or maybe you have a full-time recruiter, and then you have your agency partners, right? And I think for every company and for every head of people or every head of TA, that strategy is a little different. Like some companies I know rely almost exclusively on agencies. Some companies have a strategy of, okay, we'll use a contract recruiter for 6 months, and then that's it. And some companies kind of use a little bit of everything, or they have a full-time recruiter.
Right.
And this might differ, but I guess, maybe you can use your current experience or your previous experience at Rubius. What type of strategies have you really implemented in order to attract the top talent to your organization?
Yeah. I think it really depends on like the chapter that the company is going through. It depends like on how you're going to build out your team. I think when I really reflect though, like on what a team, how I've structured teams in the past, it's usually a mix.
Yeah.
I mean, biotech, life science, like it's just such a competitive space. I think there's something really beautiful about having an amazing like full-time recruiter on your team who's dedicated, like really knows the organization, the culture, the different nuances of hiring managers, right? Like I think that's what gets candidates excited when they hear that a recruiter is excited about, a position that they're pitching them to. But then like on the flip side, you were a part of it with me. Like we built out an entire manufacturing site in Rhode Island, and there was primarily done by contract recruiting. And they did an amazing job. That said, like we had a great culture on the TA team, and I think I prefer to treat everyone the same, right? Whether you're agency, contract, full time. And I think there was an upside to that because they felt like they were a full-time employee.
Yeah. So it sounds like you really kind of mix it up depending on what the need is. So if you have a particular build, like for example, you mentioned that manufacturing build, you don't need a full-time contractor, but maybe you need one for 6 months or a year. You'll bring that contract recruiter on. And then, from an agency perspective, I think some companies will only use agencies to bring on contractors or consultants. Some companies will use agencies for high level or retained searches. Some of them will just use in general. I mean, where does that kind of fit into your mix? Is it really for those specialized or hard to fill or contract roles? Tell me about that.
It depends. I think it depends on the bandwidth of the team, how many positions we have open. Also, I think depends on like what are the strengths of the internal talent that I already have. Like you have some recruiters who are really great technical and scientific recruiters, right? I'm probably not going to source out a position to an agency if I have someone that's already really good at it.
Of course.
I think my overall philosophy is the more senior level positions I'll go to agency on, or just those positions that fit within a more niche space within the industry. I also think, I've had a few different roles where I was managing sourcing teams. And so your success was based on how much agency spend the company was using, because you wanted to show that your internal sourcers were finding the talent themselves. So I think when I think of how like a search kicks off, I tend to try to want to do it internally, but you have to be honest with yourself. Like sometimes there's just positions that are hard to fill and you need to go out to agency because there's relationships that they have that your internal recruiters aren't going to have.
Totally. No, that makes sense. All right. So, I'll take it one step further and then we'll we'll ditch this topic. But you go into a company, right? You say you're working with the CEO, and the CEO says, all right, Kate, we have to hire 100 people in the next 2 years, and we're going to hire across the board from discovery to tech ops to clinical. We need a finance team. We need an administrative team. Really, every function that goes within a biotech. What's your first step?
I hire a full-time recruiter.
You hire a full-time recruiter.
TA partner. Yep. Like mid-level at a minimum, right? This is someone who can work with me, right? Partner with me to figure out like what the needs of the organization are going to be, start building relationships with the hiring managers, helping hiring managers understand their role, their interview team's role in the process. Because I think that's where sometimes there's that friction between TA and the hiring managers or the business. It's like, we're in this together, right? Our role is to help find the talent and get them excited about this, but your role is to help me pitch the candidate, get them excited as well, help them, throughout the recruiting and interview process. If you have that chemistry with your hiring manager, like, you're golden.
So I'm kind of chuckling here because I think that's a really good topic, is potential friction between the actual end user or the hiring manager and the TA person who really is trying to help that hiring manager. I'm curious to kind of hear your thoughts on how that evolves, how that happens, and maybe some, you don't have to list any names, obviously, but some experiences where maybe it started off tough and then it kind of worked out. Because if I'm a hiring manager, like, I'm going to want the TA person to be my best friend. And maybe that's my personality, but I'm going to want to get on their good side because they're going to help my business line or my division grow. And so you mentioned friction, like what types of, I guess get more specific. What do you mean by that? Or what have you seen in terms of friction?
I'm dying because I just got a text from one of my, them too, from one of my former hiring managers who just started a new role and told his new TA person, like, my HR business partner at my previous company just told me I'm an annoying and difficult hiring manager. And I was like, you are, my God. I think when you're kicking off and starting to build a relationship with a hiring manager, it's like, as that TA partner, your role is to help them understand the process. Like, this is my role. These are my responsibilities in finding talent, but this is your role as well. And that, you go back to operations, like, there is an aspect of like having a good process in place that just helps the overall talent acquisition strategy. But when I think of like the more difficult hiring managers, you got to be flexible. Like, when you're crafting your job description, an ideal candidate, like, you got to know what's a must have and what are some nice to haves. And I think at times there can be that friction with the TA partner and hiring manager when the hiring manager doesn't feel like the talent that's coming across their desk is like checking all those boxes, but the TA partner feels like, come on, man, you got to meet me in the middle. And I think that's one. And you get through it. I think then you have your maybe more difficult hiring manager who just doesn't really know what they want, right? You kick off a search. They think that this is the position. TA partner goes out, starts sourcing, engaging talent, presenting, like nothing's good enough, right? Or they completely flip-flop and are looking for a completely different profile. Like, I would say those are some of the conflicts that the TA partners can deal with. Yeah, no,
I guess I've seen that firsthand now that you're talking about it out loud. And and also kind of on the partner side, you see some of that as well. And so it makes sense. I had an interesting conversation with somebody who's in a role similar to yours, and she told me how much time she takes up front when kind of qualifying or doing an intake with a hiring manager, and how kind of robust that process was on her end. And I was actually pretty surprised. So before giving you the amount of time she takes, I want to hear your perspective. How much time, when you're kicking off a role with a hiring manager, how much time are you taking to kind of really sift through the details and boil down what they need versus what they'd like to have?
I think it depends on the relationship you have with the hiring manager, right? I think you get to a point where if you've built this trust, you've helped them hire in the past, you get to know the nuances that go on with that team, maybe that hiring manager. There's less time spent there. probably like 20, 30 minutes. Like, what's the position? What's the impact that this position is going to have within the team? Why should this candidate be excited to come join this team and this hiring manager? Like, those are the questions that you want to be asking. And then you get into like, what are the specific technical needs or the expertise that you're going to need to join the team. But I'm not spending a wild amount of time.
Yeah. My kind of approach was always similar to yours. It depends on the relationship. And typically those meetings or calls are, 25 to 30 minutes per position. The person I spoke to, and she's awesome, by the way, she said she demands an hour with each hiring manager. And I said, wow, that's a pretty big ask, right? Because these hiring managers are super busy. But she's like, Chris, I find that if we don't go through every detail and double or triple check everything, and then have a follow-up afterwards, it has the potential to make the process so much more arduous than it needs to be. And I said, hey, kudos to you. Maybe I should recheck my internal process when I'm working with hiring managers. But I thought everyone has a different opinion, right? Everyone has a different approach, and there's no right or wrong way. But I was kind of taken aback by how much time she demands from hiring managers. But I think it's worked out for her, and everyone has got their own thing.
I will say, when you think of like, I'm at my second startup now, you have new managers. Some haven't even interviewed before, let alone hired, right?
Forget about that.
And so there's this aspect of educating the new hiring manager if they're open to it, right? And so, sure, in that case, you're walking them through like, what is talent acquisition? Like, I remember I when I was interviewing for my role at Genti, it was a new bench scientist out of MIT, and they said, can you just help me understand like what HR actually does, right? They're coming out of academia. They haven't had any exposure to a human resources function. It's like a totally valid question.
Totally. Yeah, you bring up a good point. And actually, I want to ask you about this. Is sometimes these hiring managers, you kind of forget that they're not experts in interviewing people. And while they know what they want the role to look like, maybe they don't actually know the best way to ask the questions or the best questions to even ask to get the information that they need. You know that because that's your specialization. I know that. And I think it's easy for individuals like you and I to take that particular skill set or that experience for granted. And so when you are working with a hiring manager or a newer hiring manager, have you offered and I'm sure you have, coaching or formalized coaching and how to get them to behaviorally and technically interview?
Absolutely. I think definitely. That's one of the first things that in my past 2 roles that I've introduced to the business. Like, honestly, Chris, even before putting some of the shiny tools in place, was what is your role as the hiring manager? What is the role of the interviewer? I think a amazing best practice for any hiring manager is understand who your interview panel is going to be. Let them know that they're going to be on your interview panel. Let them know what the position is that you're actually recruiting for, right? And then what is each interviewer's role within it?
Yeah.
And I think by mapping that out and sending it to the interview team when the hiring manager does this can have a really great impact just on the overall process. And then, interviewing is a skill. It comes naturally to some people, but interviewing can be awkward for people.
Totally.
And so being able to provide what is behavioral based interviewing? How do you ask a question without leading the candidate to the answer that you're looking for? So spending some time in training, I think, is really important.
I love that. And it's a good point. And I think it's something that's really easy to overlook. Right.
It is.
Yeah. All right. So now you've got your recruiting process down. You've got a good talent acquisition operation in process in place. You have the right resources that you're tapping on for the actual recruiting aspect. You have the people on board, right? And obviously there's a scientific goal or there's a milestone that every biotech or pharma company is trying to reach. They want to advance their programs, get their drug approved, right? There's these specific milestones. Most people are aligned with that. And I think that strategy and that direction comes primarily from the executive side of things. However, I think in your role, it's important for you to understand and know those goals. that's not really your, I mean, it's part of your main goal, right? But I got to imagine your main goal is to make sure that people are culturally aligned and that there are pieces of the company and ways and things that the company stand for from a value perspective to help achieve those goals. So that to me seems really dynamic and really challenging. And in your role, I think that's probably the biggest piece of it.
It is.
So I'm just going to ask, how do you do that? Because I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Yeah. Great question. I mean, I think it's probably like one of the proudest moments, and I reflect over my career, is like the culture that we built at Rubius and like the amazing talent and people that we were able to bring on board. You know, how did we go? And we're doing it at Genti too. You know, how did we go about doing it? It's like, you want to understand, like, who are we as a company? Like, what's important to us as an organization? Like, your scientific mission, that's there, right? Like, that's obviously all well and good. But like, when you think of bringing people together as almost like a family, how do you want to operate? How do you want to support one another? How do you want to get your work done? And so being able to like have those relationships with your employees, understand the values and the behaviors that are important to them, I think really can help you set yourself apart in building an amazing culture. And we did that at Rubius. Like, we're doing that at Genti. Like, I love the people that I work with. Like, think about it, Chris. You work with you're working with your employees and colleagues, what, 50, 60, maybe 70, 80 hours a week, depending on where you are as a company. You want to be able to like the people that you're working with. You also want to be able to trust in their ability to get their work done, especially like when you think of HR being a support function to an organization. Like, I want to be able to enjoy the people that I have to interact with on a daily basis. Of course. And I think it goes a really long way.
What, I mean, I think every company's probably a little different, but I got to imagine if you're in charge of what we just discussed, what type of values do you try to really promote and instill within the foundation of the organization?
Yeah, that's a great question too. The first that I would say is, you want to be able to find people that are empathetic, right? And like can show that they care about the well-being of others. Like, that goes such a long way, you know, and I think that comes naturally to others. Then there's some people that are really bad at it. They don't give a shit about their colleague. They're competitive. They're in there to do a job and, you know, go home afterwards. Like, for me, that's not a value that I would look for. I think, you know, in this ever-changing world that we're in, like, you've got to be adaptable and flexible. Like, change can suck, right? As humans, sometimes you resist change depending on what it is, but like the ability to flex and stretch as needed, I think, is also super important. And then what would my last one be? I don't know if this is one, but you've got to have a good sense of humor. Like, for God's sake, life is so short. Like, you've got to be able to laugh. Yeah. You know, you're going to make mistakes along the way. Being able to rebound and shift as a single employee, as a team, and to be able to do that together with a smile on your face, I think goes a really long way.
No, I love it. That checks a lot of boxes. It really does. I mean, everything you mentioned, so simple, but I think it really does totally cover, in my opinion, almost every base you need in order to really have a good culture. One thing you mentioned that this is interesting. You mentioned that certain people are competitive and they really don't care or give a shit about anyone else. However, you know, in my experience, what I've found, and this isn't all the time, but sometimes those individuals don't know that it's okay to care about other people at work, because however they've grown up or whatever environment they come from, it was just a very competitive environment. And it wasn't really like part of their job or part of the culture to care about anyone else. The only part of their job was to advance whatever that particular goal was. And it wasn't really cared about or made okay to care about anyone else. Have you ever had a situation and I've had these situations where you kind of, in your role specifically, get an opportunity to talk to that person or confront that person, and assuming they're just not a complete sociopath, have you ever been able to break through and be, listen, it's okay to actually be a little bit vulnerable, and we appreciate your competitive and your competitiveness and your drive, and that's really important. But it's actually all right to take a different approach with your team. Has that happened? I mean, I don't know if I don't lead you too much, but
Sure.
that seems like a big piece, because I think there's a lot of people that, and I think we've come a long way in the last decade, but there's probably a lot of people that don't feel that it's okay to be empathetic at work.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, I think of when I first started out, like, you didn't go to work. What do I want to say? When I first started working, like, it was a job, right? And I thought of the people I worked with as my colleagues, right? Like, I didn't start out going in assuming I'd have these like deep rooted friendships and relationships. Like, I've really started to feel that way over the past 10 years. And, I am competitive. And so maybe that's an aspect of it. But I think even just COVID and the pandemic in general, like, there's a different side of people and our colleagues that we got to see. Some of it great, other aspects, you did see people in a vulnerable state. It's been a really tough couple of years. So I think that's probably helped in some ways, where you're seeing people be people and human and open up to one another.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I think we both just kind of talked about the last 10 years or so. Obviously, COVID was a piece of it, but I think even before COVID, it seemed to be, you show up at work, this is your job, you're competitive, and you produce. And then I think there's been a pretty conscious and apparent shift that work can be an empathetic place. And that's not the way it always used to be. I mean, what's your take on that? Because
no,
you're
right.
It's a shift.
But think about this. I mean, even just technology and social media, like, there was a point when you and I first started working, there was social media, but it wasn't used the same way, right? Like, you weren't, I don't know about you, but like, I wasn't connecting with people. You can tell that you and I are always on LinkedIn, but I wasn't like friending people on Facebook, right? That's what we had at the time. That I wasn't friending the people that I worked with. Then all these other platforms have popped up, and like, you are connecting with your colleagues. So there's this, you're seeing this different side of your colleagues that like we weren't seeing 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's right. I mean, I would intentionally not connect with employees.
Same.
But I don't want this person on my personal Facebook or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how it's evolved. Now that we're talking about it, it really has come a long way. And then who knows what the next 10 years is going to be like. But I'd say it's pretty transformational in the 2010s from how close you are, or how much you know about your coworkers.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. This is great. So my last question for you, unless there's anything else that you want to talk about, my last question for you is, we started off the conversation talking about how we got into talent acquisition. Nobody seems to know how they got into it. I don't really know how I got into it, but I got into it. And, people entering into it kind of like the sound of it because, it like you said before, it kind of sounds like sexy, right? Like, I get an opportunity to talk to people and bring them into an organization or find them for another organization. Something about that can be kind of exciting for people. But someone who's going to enter the talent acquisition or the recruiting fields who's never done it before, just like you and I started, what advice would you give to a new recruiter or TA professional? Whether it's life advice or professional advice, it could be either. Because as you know, this job is very intertwined with your life.
Yeah. I don't know if I'll be giving life advice. I don't know if you want life advice.
All right, we'll skip that one.
So I talked about it a little bit. Like, you've got to have thick skin, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you're going to hit some bumps in the road. I think going back to like another topic that we briefly discussed on is like, the ability to build those relationships, like spend time with candidates, get to know what's important to them, spend time with your hiring managers, like understand what's important to them and the culture of the team that they're looking to build, show that they're being heard, I think can go a really long way. I guess the only other thing I would say is I prefer if I'm talking to a candidate, right? I really like to get to know the candidate, like from a personal standpoint, like not in a weird way, right? But like, who are they as a person? What's important to them, like outside of work? Because I think that goes a really long way when it comes to like getting them excited to consider joining a company.
Of course. No, I love that. And that's a piece that I can relate to. I always try to get to know people personally, and it makes a big difference, right? Because, at the end of the day, you're dealing with people. You're not dealing with just a CV or a LinkedIn profile. Right. Yeah.
The other thing is like talent acquisition's hard, and, you start out and maybe you don't like it. That's okay. Like if you want to stay in the HR field, like there's so many different aspects of HR that people can consider, but TA isn't for everyone.
True. It's not for most, actually.
Yeah, I would actually agree.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Kate, unless you have anything else, I think this was an awesome conversation, and I really appreciate your time, and it's been really cool to talk tactically and in depth about some of these topics that we just have never really gotten the chance to talk about. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Talent Therapy Podcast with Chris Tamburini. This show is for entertainment purposes only and is copywritten by Rana and Vance, LLC.